bless you. I'm Dr. Kenneth L. Samuel, pastor of Victory for the World Church. I am so delighted to welcome you back to Bible study on this evening. I will give a little while for those who will be participating with us to join us. So let me just take a little time and wait for you to come on board. Hopefully I will see your names appear shortly. Hopefully I will see your names appear shortly. Sister Margie Bell, glad you're with us. Reverend Will Williamson, good evening to you. And I think we'll have a few others come on, and then we'll go on and get started. Sister Dorothy Dot Hughes, God bless you this evening. All right. So the scripture says where two or three gather, Jesus says, I am one in the midst. So there are two or three of us who have gathered. So let me begin our study tonight with prayer. Gracious God, we ask for your guidance. We ask for your revelation. We ask, God, for your understanding as we read your word. Help us, God, not just to be hearers, but doers of your word. Help us to make the necessary applications to your truth and our daily lives so that we can become more like the Christ whom we love and adore. We honor you. We bless you. We thank you for this Bible study. Bless it now. Speak to our hearts and minds. Inspire us. Strengthen us. Transform us so that we can become more like Jesus. We love you and we honor you and we give you praise. In Jesus' name, amen. Once again, good evening, Sister Carol Ramsor, Mother Grinnell. Always good to have you with us in spirit, Mother. Your spirit blesses us. Mother Lucille Grinnell, Mother Betty Sherman, blessed by your spirit as well. Thank God for both of you. So I want to pick up tonight from Genesis 25. I know it's been a while since we've been in Bible study, but I appreciate y'all's faithfulness and consistency and diligence. So Genesis 25. I want to call your attention to verse 24, just by way of a refresher and background on where we are in the text. So Genesis 25 and 24 is where I'm starting to read. And of course, I like the New Living Translation of the Bible because it is just more up to date in terms of its language, and in some cases even more accurate in terms of its translation from the original Hebrew in this text. In this case, remember the Old Testament was written in Hebrew. The New Testament was written in Greek. So the New Living Testament, the New Living Translation, I think it's called, NLT, I think gives us up-to-date language and I think more accurate translations than even the King James, even though we like the King James too, because it is so poetic. But let me start reading from Genesis 25 and 24. And again, I'm reading from the New Living Translation. You can use any translation you like, but just know that I'm reading from the New Living Translation. And when the time came to give birth, Rebekah, who is, of course, married to Isaac, son of Abraham, Rebekah discovered that she did indeed have twins. The first one was very red at birth and covered with thick hair like a fur coat, so they named him Esau. Then the other twin was born with his hand grasping Esau's heel, so they named him Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when the twins were born. And so Isaac was 40 years old when he and Rebekah married, and then 20 years later, they give birth to twins. And again, that emphasizes the fact that when we are, and as we each wait on the promises of God to be manifested in our lives, the first part is believing, but the second part is waiting. All right? The first part is believing, but that's not all of it. The second part is waiting. Just as Abraham had to wait on the birth of Isaac, and Ishmael for that matter, but certainly on the birth of Isaac through Sarah, just as Abraham and Sarah had to wait many years. Here we see again Isaac having to wait 20 years, from 40 to 60, before his firstborn sons arrive. And again, it speaks to the fact that while we have to believe God, we also have to be willing to wait on God, and we should be asking ourselves constantly, what is it that enables us to continue to wait on God? How do we strengthen ourselves while we wait? The scripture says, they that wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. Do you wait and get tired? Do you wait and get frustrated? Or do you wait and continue to be strengthened in your faith? Is your faith strengthened, or is your faith waned as a result of waiting? And maybe I'll explore that a little bit later through some questions. But it's the waiting. Now, it's not easy. It's difficult because we like things to happen quickly. We live in that microwave generation. We want things to happen. And when things don't happen, we're wondering, well, what's wrong? What can I do? What's the problem? Maybe I should, do something else. But each of us in our Christian walk, each of us in our Christian experience have to learn how to wait on God. And the waiting is a part of the testing of our faith. We say we have faith that God will deliver, that God will make the way, that God will answer prayer. We say we have faith in that, but the test is, can you wait for it? Because if you can't wait for it, then you need to question whether or not you believed it in the first place. Any promise from God is certainly worth waiting for, since God gives us no time frame as to when those blessings will be manifested. So we have to learn how to wait. And the waiting tests our faith, but the waiting can also strengthen our faith if we are constantly being fed and reminded the living word of God, which is why even in the waiting process, God kept on speaking to Abraham, and now to Isaac. And we're going to see that in the text. But I want to examine, this waiting process, because a whole lot of us, even now, are waiting on God's blessings to manifest or to be made known, to be shown in our lives. Many of us are still waiting for God's blessings. Many of God's blessings, not that we are not blessed, not that we can't, not that we don't have blessings that we cannot currently see and taste and count and all that and spend and all that. But there are other things, and it just depends on how God has spoken to you and what you believe God is doing in your life. And are we willing to not just believe God for it, but are we willing to wait on God for it? So again, 20 years of waiting. 20 years of waiting. Now, thankfully, Isaac didn't do what Abraham and Sarah did, and that is bringing a surrogate, right? A stand-in to do what, they wanted done. By the way, anytime there was a delay or anytime there was a problem with a married couple having children in the Bible, it was usually assumed that it was the woman's issue. It was usually assumed it was the woman's issue. She was barren. And in many cases, because she was barren, she was looked upon as cursed or looked down upon by others who were more fertile or who could bear children. It was not until later on that scientifically we understand now that the issue may not be with the woman, it may be with the man. But not so in biblical times, because they didn't have that understanding. The woman was the problem. She was the one that was cursed. And in Rebecca's case, Rebecca, Isaac's wife, she could have taken the same attitude that Sarah, Abraham's wife, took, and said, well, since I can't do it, let's bring in somebody else who can do it. And in Sarah's case, she brought in her handmaid Hagar, but that wasn't God's plan, of course. So it ended up causing havoc not only in the household, but it established the bitter rivalries that exist to this day between the sons and daughters of Abraham, because in the Middle East, we have relatives fighting relatives. The Israelites against the Palestinians, those are relatives fighting relatives. They are both descendants of Abraham and even other countries. Abraham is indeed the father of many nations, Israel being one of them. But Israel is the nation that God has elected to work through to bring salvation to the world. Even though Abraham's descendants are varied throughout the Middle East. They're not just Israelites, or for that matter, not just Palestinians. All right. So Rebekah and Isaac didn't make the mistake that Abraham and Sarah did. And after 20 years, they did give birth to twins. And those twins are Jacob and Esau. Esau being the firstborn, and Jacob, of course, coming after him, holding the heel of his brother, indicating that he's a scrapper. He's gonna try to get what he wants. Even if he has to wrestle for it. That kind of sets a theme for Jacob's life. That he's a scrapper, he's a wrestler. He's going to, he's going to bring it to you to get what he wants in life. So 27, we talked about as the boys grew. We talked about this before. This is just by way of review to bring us all up to speed. I'm in Genesis 25 and 27. For those of you that are just joining me on this evening, glad you're with me. Genesis 25 and 27 is where I am. And I'm reading from the New Living Translation of the Bible. Whatever translation you use is fine. But I'm reading from the New Living Translation. Genesis 25 and 27. Verse 27. As the boys grew, Esau became a skillful hunter. He was an outdoorsman, but Jacob had a quiet temperament, preferring to stay at home. Isaac loved Esau because he enjoyed eating the wild game Esau brought him, but Rebekah loved Jacob. And so we have these divisions, these favoritisms in the family that are never good, because whenever you show distinction among children, among siblings, you set the groundwork for dissension and strife that people live with, by the way, for many, many years. And in this particular case, the parents are at fault, as they usually are, when it comes to these kind of divisions that tear families up. These things are very, very real. Maybe your family was victimized by favoritism, somebody's favoritism, maybe your parents, maybe your grandparents. But this way of making some of the children or some of the siblings or one or two of the siblings feel better than the rest for whatever reason. It causes problems. And it caused problems in the family of Isaac and Rebekah. It was a very dysfunctional family. Dysfunctional. Didn't operate properly. But it was because of Isaac's favoritism for Esau. And notice that he favored Esau Isaac favored Esau because of what Esau gave him, namely the wild game. Esau was a hunter, and his father liked that. And his father liked the fact that he could bring home, meat and prepare it. And, apparently Isaac was a lover of meat and wild game. Not the best reason to favor anyone, by the way, just because of what they can produce and give you. So there's multiple problems with this. The fact that Isaac favors Esau for the meat. Right? As it says in verse 28, Isaac loved Esau. Read it, you see it with me. And I'm in Genesis 25 and 28. Isaac loved Esau because he enjoyed eating the wild game Esau brought home. That's not a good reason to love anybody, especially a child, because of what a child can do for you. That's why you love the child. By the way, whether it be the child brings home wild game or the child brings home good grades, or the child brings home money. In a lot of our households, children are bringing home money to support families. And that's not a good reason to bestow your love upon anyone. But Rebecca loved Jacob, maybe because Jacob, hung around the house more. Maybe he was in his mother's company more than Esau, with Esau being out hunting and Jacob being around at home with Rebecca. Again, that's not a good reason to favor a child. Not because of what they do, not necessarily because they like what you like. In this case, Jacob liked more of the household matters, taking care of the house and being at home. And his mother was there. So, they formed a bond, whereas Esau being the hunter. Very interesting thing. And here, I guess maybe this is a question. Is it that you love those whom you think love you? In terms of your children, if you have more than one, do you love the ones that you think love you? Or do you just love them all equally? Even the ones that perhaps don't spend as much time with you as you'd like? Or even the ones that don't necessarily follow take your advice as you give it? It's an interesting thing here. Because there are some who would say, well, no, Rebecca was justified because, Jacob spent more time with her. Some would argue, well, Esau was justified because, some would argue that Isaac was justified because Esau perhaps spent more time with him, hunting and bringing home the wild game. I don't know. It's an interesting thing here, but I'm thinking that somehow parents have to maintain a certain level of objectivity, right? When it comes to their children, so that they at least, by all intents and purposes, are as fair and equal, as balanced as they can be. So that one child is not raised feeling favored and the other child is not raised feeling neglected by either parent. Now I only have one child, so I can bestow all of my love, and affection on her. I only have one, so there's no, I don't have another one. But for those of you who have more than one children, or for those of you who have siblings, this is an interesting thing to consider in your own family. Do you think that your parents or your grandparents or whoever raised you, do you think that they were fair and equitable in their display of affection and love and support? Or do you think that certain siblings were favored and certain were not? And how obvious was it? Because it can be very obvious. In this family, it was very obvious that the father liked Esau, Isaac liked Esau, and Rebecca favored Jacob. Very obvious. Now, it caused a lot of havoc, caused a lot of grief, caused a lot of damage. It's very obvious. And as we think about this and come, toward our discussion time, how has that played out in your family? How has favoritism impacted your family? And how does it impact the relationship that you have with your siblings to this day? If indeed that was a factor in your family, or were your parents, your grandparents, whoever raised you, were they very good at making no distinctions? Not every parent does that. Not every grandparent does that. Now, it's not always an easy thing to do, like I say, because we tend to favor those who, like us. They hang around us. They support us. They listen to our advice. They give us what we like. And then what about the others? And don't you think children sense that? Adults know that. Verse 29, I'm in Genesis 25. One day, when Jacob, let me just make a note for my sibling rivalries. One day, I'm in verse 29, when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau arrived home from the wilderness, exhausted and hungry. Esau said to Jacob, I'm starved, give me some of your red stew. This is how Esau got his other name, Edom, which means red. All right, Jacob replied, but, and by the way, your red stew was like a lentil stew, In this case, it was red. Um, 31. All right, Jacob replied, but trade me your rights as the firstborn son. And if we talked extensively about what those rights included, the firstborn was to receive a double portion of the father's inheritance. The firstborn son was to receive a double portion of the father's inheritance. And being the firstborn also meant that the mantle of leadership would pass from the patriarch, in this case, Abraham, the father, the patriarch. Patriarch means father. Patriarch, father. Patriarchy is a system based on fatherly or male supremacy. Patriarchy. So you often hear me talk about patriarchy. It's derived from the word patriarch, which means father. Matriarch means mother. Patriarch means father. This is a patriarchal society where the men, the fathers, rule. And so the leadership is passed from the patriarch to the firstborn son. He gets a double portion, and he basically assumes the mantle of leadership as head of the family, in this case, the clan, because you got servants involved, you got other people involved. And so the leadership is now was supposed to pass to the firstborn being Esau, according to tradition. But Esau didn't realize apparently what he had. How do you let your appetite get in the way of your birthright? Over a meal of lentil stew, of red stew? 32, look, I'm dying of starvation, said Esau. What good is my birthright to me now? Well, obviously, you don't know the value of what you have, which indicates that you're not a spiritual person. You only live for the moment. That was Esau's downfall. Only living for the moment and having no regard for spiritual matters that transcend the material and the immediate, transcend or go beyond the material and the immediate. So by the way, Esau is the way most people live in the world. All they want is just to get by. All they're interested in is their what we call immediate gratification, immediate satisfaction, immediate consumption. And ultimate things, eternal things, spiritual things, they pay no attention to. They pay no attention to ultimate things, spiritual things, material things. And so Esau is a prototype for a worldly individual, because worldly people are only concerned about their immediate gratification. And all this, and so they do not build their hopes on things eternal. Therefore, they cannot hold to God's unchanging hand, because they're only obsessed and concerned with what's immediate. What is my immediate satisfaction and gratification? 33, but Jacob said, first you must swear that your birthright is mine. So Jacob plays on Esau's materialism. He plays on the fact that Esau is the kind of person who only wants what's in front of him with no regard for the larger, more important matters of life. So he plays on it. He knows his brother. And by the way, people who are, just only out for what they can get, they can be easily manipulated because people know what they're going to go after. I mean, it's up to us to set priorities in our lives. And so many times we are guilty of setting the wrong priorities because we are so caught up in immediate survival and everyday living that we miss the fact that there are values beyond what is immediate that we must also be attentive to. So 33, Jacob says, first, give me your birthright. First, you must swear that your birthright is mine. So Esau swore an oath, thereby selling all his rights as the firstborn to his brother Jacob for some lentil stew. My, how we trade what is valuable for what is immediate. How we trade what is valuable, what is valuable for what is immediate. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and lentil stew. Esau ate the meal, then got up and left. He showed contempt for his rights as the firstborn, and that was his downfall. Contempt, disregard. And ultimately, when you disregard spiritual matters, you disregard God, and it is an insult to the divine. Okay, I'm going to Genesis 26. A severe famine now struck the land, as had happened before in Abraham's time. So Isaac moved to Gerar, where Abimelech, king of the Philistines, lived. By the way, before I go there, I want to make a point. I want to go back to Genesis 25, where Jacob swindles his brother Esau out of the birthright. And just remind us again that Jacob didn't have to do that because God had already promised that Jacob would have the birthright. Back up to Genesis 25 and 21. Let's do that. Back up to Genesis 25 and 21. Isaac pleaded with the Lord on behalf of his wife, Rebekah, because again, it took 20 years for Rebekah to become pregnant and bear a son to Isaac. So Isaac is pleading with the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was unable to have children. The Lord answered Isaac's prayer, and Rebekah became pregnant with twins, but the two children struggled with each other. So, let me 23. And the Lord told her, the sons in your womb will become two nations. From the very beginning, the two nations will be rivals. One nation will be stronger than the other, and your older son will serve your younger son. One nation will be stronger than the other, and your older son will serve your younger son. And when the time came to give birth, Rebekah discovered that she did indeed have twins. Let me see. I'm trying to get to the fact that God has already given Jacob. Let me go back. Hold on. Let's go to don't you love live Bible study? I want to go back to let me see. Maybe I want to go to Genesis 26. Maybe that's where I want to go. 3 through 6. Let me go there. Let me see if that's where I want to go. do this because I'm listening in the race. Isaac stating the point I want to make is that God had confirmed with Abraham time and time again, excuse me, that the blessing would come through Isaac. And then God had confirmed with Isaac that the blessing would come through the younger son. And I'm just trying to find in my notes where that is. I thought I had it marked, but give me a while. Give me just a little bit to find it, because I want you to see that. I'm trying to make the point that there was no need for Jacob to steal his brother's birthright. Okay, we got Abraham responded, "Be careful, let me take my son there." Oath. All right, I may have to find it on my own since I didn't mark it. Yes, I may have to just look for it on my own, but I want to make the point. I want to emphasize the point with you that there was no need for Jacob to have to steal his brother's birthright because God had already promised it to him. That's my point. And let me just go to back to 25. Back to Genesis 25. Yeah, okay. Oh, I just read it. We just read it, and I'm looking for it. And I have glasses on. Can you believe that? Genesis 25 and 23. Okay, Genesis 25 and 23. Let's read it carefully. And the Lord told her, this is when Rebecca is experiencing the wrangling in her womb with the twins that are maybe wrestling, with each other in the womb. And the Lord told her, the sons in your womb will become two nations. From the very beginning, the two nations will be rivals because they're having a rambunctious time in her womb. One nation will be stronger than the other. Get this, and your older son will serve your younger son. That's the point I want to make. Your older son will serve your younger son. That is not the way it should have been through tradition, because in tradition, the younger serves the older. Don't forget that the according to custom, according to tradition, the birthright that includes, as we've been saying, the promise that God would be with him, the property, the land that they were on, and the posterity. You will be a great nation, or be your seed will become great in many nations. According to custom, all the younger children, all the younger sons were to serve the older, because the mantle of leadership and responsibility was to fall to the firstborn. That would be the oldest, right? But look at this prophecy. God says, you got two nations in you. And of course, the two nations are represented in Jacob and Esau. But Esau was the firstborn, and Jacob was the secondborn. So by custom, Jacob should have served Esau. Esau should have received the mantle of leadership from his father, Isaac. But look at this prophecy. One nation will be stronger than the other, and the older son will serve your younger son. Do you see the reversal there? God speaks to Rebecca and says, it's not going by tradition. Your older will end up serving your younger, even though by tradition your younger should serve your older. And that's when, of course, Rebecca realized that she did indeed have twins. And then, we go forth with the birth of Esau, then the birth of Jacob holding his heel. So my point is that given the fact that God had already prophesied it to Rebecca, and given the fact that Rebecca and Jacob spent so much time together, I'm sure that she told Jacob what God had told her. I'm sure that Rebecca told her son, Jacob, what God had told her. In order for them to be close, that probably would have happened. So, believing what God had said, why was it necessary then for Jacob to take it upon himself to take what God had already given him? That is the right of the firstborn. Or to put it another way, why do we feel the need to enter into all kind of deceptive schemes to get what God has already given us if we believe we already have it by faith? Then why do you need to scheme, lie, cheat, steal to get it if you believe that it's already given to you by faith? Do you really have to enter into rivalry and bitterness to get what God wants to give you? Is that really necessary? Is it really necessary? And if you are engaging in schemes and lies and deceit to get something, then what does that say about your faith? Maybe I can break it down even further. How can we say, the Lord is my shepherd, and then engage in thievery and deception? So either the Lord is your shepherd or the Lord isn't your shepherd. Now, which one is it? Because if the Lord is your shepherd, then the Lord is a good provider. And you have no need to lie, cheat, steal, or even for that matter, be envious or jealous of what anybody else has. Because the Lord is your shepherd and the Lord is taking care of you. Now, I have to talk about this because I cannot tell you how many good Christian church people have gotten caught up in robbery, deception, graft, greed, to the extent that we've even sometimes have to consider pressing legal charges against church folk for being dishonest. It's very sad. It's very sad. Because how can you say, I want to say it again, how can you say the Lord is my shepherd and you're stealing? It's not matching up. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. But I'm engaged in a scheme stealing people's money. I go to church, I shout the fact that God is my provider, but I'm engaged in some underhanded, illegal, illicit plan to get money that doesn't belong to me. What is that? And how many people, though, do it every day? Some people are in a scheme right now. In a scheme to get money, in a scheme to steal, in a scheme, and we have all kind of justifications for it, by the way. Oh, the Lord know I needed it, so that's why, the Lord understands. No, the Lord understands you're a thief. That's what the Lord understands. And it's an insult to God, who's supposed to be our shepherd, who's supposed to be our provider, that we don't have any more faith in God than to think that in order to get what we need in life, we have to lie, cheat, scheme, deceive, backbite, and manipulate our way to get it. What does that say about our faith in God? And a whole lot of folk don't repent till they get caught. Now, let's just might as well be honest about that. Some of these schemes go on for years and years and years and years by good church people who shout every and clap and praise, but who somehow have missed the connection between honest reliance on God and the need to manipulate and scheme to get what you want in life. Now, why is there a disconnection there? Why is there such a disconnection? Jacob didn't have to do that. God had already promised that Jacob would be God had already promised that the older would serve the younger, which is another way of saying that God is saying, I'm not going by tradition, I'm not going by custom. I have chosen to bless the younger one, and the older one will serve him. It's God's prerogative, by the way, to give God's blessings to whoever God wants to give them to. And yet, Jacob, in spite of this prophecy, in spite of this statement by God, God said, this is what's going to happen. Apparently, neither Jacob nor Rebekah believed Neither Jacob nor Rebekah believed God, which is why both of them got caught up in a scheme to steal what God had already given them. How can you steal what God has already given you? And people do it. God gave it to you. Well, why did you have to steal it? Why did you have to lie to get it? If God gave it to you, why did you have to lie to get it? If you say God gave it to you. You don't have to lie to get what God, you don't have to lie to be blessed by God. Now, if you don't believe God and you just want something and you determine you're going to get it by any means necessary, that's when the lies and deceits come in. Those are acts of disbelief. And both Rebekah and her son, Jacob, were engaged in acts of disbelief. And by the way, caused havoc in their own family because of their lack of faith. It's right there in Genesis 25 and 23. Genesis 25 and 23. God had already stated that Jacob would be blessed, but Jacob didn't believe it. Neither did his mother. So Jacob gets Esau to sell him his birthright when God had already given it to him. Interesting, by the way, how sin plays with our minds. Because didn't the enemy use the same tactic with Adam and Eve? You go back to our very first lessons in Genesis and that whole deception with eating from the forbidden tree. And this whole notion that Eve apparently thought that in order to get the best of life, that she needed to disobey God and eat that forbidden fruit. That somehow God was holding something from her. And Adam, of course, believed the same thing because he ate too, both of them. So they ended up disobeying God, eating from the forbidden tree, and losing what God had already given them, namely life in paradise. They forfeited what God had already given them, trying to get it on their own terms and on their own accord through disobedience. And so I want us to think about sin as an attempt of the enemy to get us to think that we cannot have what we really need and what we really want in life by obeying God. That in order to get what we really want and what we really need in life, we have to step outside of God's will and get it on our own terms. We have to step outside of God's will and get it on our own terms. And when we do that, we sin. And when we do that, sometimes we forfeit what God had already given us. Adam and Eve wanted what? Knowledge. So they ate the fruit for knowledge. They already had knowledge. They knew God. They knew each other intimately. No fig leaves at the beginning. And they knew that it was right to trust God and obey God because God was their ultimate benefactor, beneficiary. God had placed them in paradise, given them a purpose for living, put them together. They had everything they wanted. What else could they want outside of God's will? And yet it is the trick of the enemy to make us continue to think that what we really want and what we really need is outside of God's will. So we step outside of God's will to get what we want by our own means. And we end up sometimes jeopardizing and sacrificing all that God has given us. Adam and Eve disobeyed God, trying to get what God had already given them. Jacob and his mother Rebekah entered into a scheme to lie, cheat, and deceive to get a birthright that God had already given Jacob. This is why it's important, my brothers and sisters, that we know who we are and know whose we are and know what we have in God. Because the enemy is always going to try to convince you that what God has given you is not enough. And you need to go on your own and get more. That what God has given is not enough, so you got to go on your own and get more. When what God has given us is more than enough, if we'd only take the time to wait for it, develop it, appreciate it. Back to Genesis. I'm going to go to... What was the high price of Jacob and Rebekah's scheme? What was the high price of their scheme that they didn't have to pay if they had only trusted God, if they had only relied on God's promise, God's word? Well, they broke their father's heart. Isaac was heartbroken because they deceived him. We're going to read about that. Esau, Jacob's brother, became furious, put a death threat over the head of his brother Jacob for stealing the birthright. Rebekah, who loved Jacob dearly, had to end up sending him away, never to see him again. She never saw her beloved son again due to this concocted scheme, because she had to send him away so he would avoid death from Esau. And of course, Jacob himself became a fugitive. He had to leave his own country. I mean, he had to leave his mother and his father and go to their native land, Haran, back to Iraq, basically to avoid being killed by his brother Esau. Of course, that wasn't Rebekah's story, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But look at all the look at the high price we pay for our deception. The high price we pay for our conniving acts, when we could have trusted God and just waited. Let's go to Genesis 26. A severe famine now struck the land, as had happened before in Abraham's time. So again, we got famine. We're talking about Canaan land. So Isaac moved to Gerar, where Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, lived. 2, the Lord appeared to Isaac and said, "Do not go down to Egypt, but do as I tell you. Live here as a foreigner in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. I hereby confirm that I will give all these lands to you and to your descendants." So, again, Isaac is, maybe he's headed down to Egypt where his father fled to when famine hit Canaan land, which is present day Israel. When famine, no water, no vegetation, because there's no water to water the plants, the vegetables, the growth dries up, the livestock suffer due to lack of water, food, etc. So there's famine, severe food scarcity, famine, severe food scarcity, famine. And so he, makes a move, but doesn't quite get to Egypt. He stops short of going to Egypt. And the Lord appears to him in verse 2 of Genesis 26 and says, "Don't go down to Egypt, but do as I tell you. Live here as a foreigner in this land." And we're talking about Canaan land, which is where his father Abraham also lived as a foreigner, even though that is the promised land. "Live here as a foreigner in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. I hereby confirm that I will give all these lands to you and to your descendants." I'm going to give you the land, but right now you're going to live as a foreigner, and right now there's a famine, but I'm going to take care of you. "Just as I solemnly promised Abraham, your father, I will cause your descendants to become as numerous as the stars of the sky, and I will give them all these lands. And through your descendants, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. I will do this because Abraham listened to me and obeyed all my requirements, commands, decrees, and instructions." So Isaac stayed in Gerar, which is in Canaan land, and did not go down into Egypt as his father did. When the men who lived there asked Isaac about his wife Rebekah, he said, "She is my sister." Where did he get that from? His daddy? Abraham. Remember, Abraham lied about Sarah being his sister when in essence she was his wife, even though she was related to him, because we talked about how marrying within family relations was not frowned upon then as it is today. So you can marry your cousin, that kind of stuff. And but the point is that if you do marry your cousin, she is primarily your spouse, not your cousin. And it's deceptive to make people think otherwise. And of course, Isaac is concerned with the same thing that his father Abraham was concerned about, and that is his own skin. That apparently, Rebekah, like her mother-in-law Sarah, was a beautiful woman, and the fear is that the men in the area would kill, in this case, kill Jacob, and marry his wife Rebekah, that he's passing off as his sister. So Isaac says, "She is my sister." He was afraid to say she is my wife. He thought they would kill me to get her because she is so beautiful, as Sarah was. But sometime later, Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, by the way, his father Abraham also dealt with an Abimelech. It is highly unlikely that it was the same Abimelech, because we're talking about a span of over 100 years. So it was probably a different Abimelech. This Abimelech here is the king of the Philistines. And he looked out his window one day and saw Isaac caressing Rebekah, his sister. And that didn't look right. Immediately, Abimelech called for Isaac and exclaimed, "She is obviously your wife. Why did you say she is my sister?" "Because I was afraid someone would kill me to get her from me," Isaac replied. 10. "How could you do this to us?" Abimelech exclaimed. "One of my people might easily have taken your wife and slept with her, and you would have made us guilty of great sin." Now here we have, a Gentile king, non-Jew, telling a believer how to behave. Because Isaac, like his father Abraham, is trying to save his own skin and, again, coming up with these lies to protect himself. And it's not honest. It's not right. And Abimelech, who makes no claim to the covenant or anything like that, says, "Now you shouldn't do it because you're going to bring damnation to my kingdom for sleeping with your wife." So even among, these people that we would consider to be infidels, they're not infidels. They just believe in different gods, but they do have a set of morals. They do have a set of moral standards. And sleeping with a person's wife was one of those standards that they held very, very highly. Now, of course, it was sexist because there was not much made of sleeping of a man sleeping with other women, as long as she was not another man's wife. See, the offense was not to the woman; the offense was always to the man because she is his wife. That's how patriarchy works. So, these wealthy men, they could have concubines, girlfriends, sleep with whoever they want to. And by the way, the rights of the concubines was not even considered. But if they took another man's wife, that was the sin, because you have done wrong against another man. The woman's rights, the woman's feelings were not considered. You have offended another man because you have in essence violated another man's possession, his wife, part of his possessions. So you have this Gentile, non-believing king giving ethical and moral correction to a believer. So what happens when the world has to teach the church how to behave? What happens when the world has to step in and, tell the church there are certain things that you just should not do, and you're going to have to pay a price for doing them? Like in the case of, the molested young people in the Catholic Church, but not just in the Catholic Church, in the Protestant Church as well, in several churches. And you have a culture of cover-up in the church where people protect, people justify wrong to protect the image or the reputation of the church. And people justify wrong, and they look over evil in order to protect the image of the church. And such as in the Catholic Church, that could not have happened without a system of secrecy and collusion, allowing priests to get away with molesting young boys, and in some cases, young girls too. But, certainly young boys. And, they're given a slap on the wrist, assigned to another parish or another church, but never having to really deal with the pain and injury and damage that they cause by molesting a young life. And then the government or the legal system has to come in and tell the Catholic Church, you got to clean up your house. And by the way, we're not leaving it up to you to do it. We're going to do it. We're going through your records and we're listening to testimony because we have a case here against the church. And it doesn't just happen with sex, it happens with money laundering in the church, where people use the fact that people take advantage of the church's tax exempt status to launder money or to hide money in some cases. And then the legal system, when it's found out, has to get involved. And I've seen cases where church assets have been frozen, church doors have been padlocked by the legal system because the church has failed so miserably at handling its finances in an honest and legal manner. And here we have the case of Abimelech, who is not a part of the covenant, but Abimelech telling Isaac, the son of the covenant, you ought not be lying about your wife like that, because you're about to bring damnation upon my kingdom. Because even though I don't believe what you believe in terms of the covenant and all that, but even I know that that's wrong. See, it's sad when the world has to tell the church. How about that? I'll take it even further. I talked about sex. I talked about money. Let's talk about equality. What happens when the world has to lead the church in terms of equity and equality for all people? What happens when the world has to tell the church it's not right for you to treat your straight members, give them priority and blessings, and condemn your gay members to hell? What happens when the world has to say we need a world where everybody is equal and everybody has the same rights? And the world has to lead the church to become more liberated and more inclusive of everyone, because the church is so caught up in biases and discrimination in the name of religion. Here we got Abimelech teaching Isaac how to do what's right. And in so many cases, we got the world teaching the church what's right. The world teaching the church what's right. You ever thought about that? And Abimelech, I'm in Genesis 26 and 11, then Abimelech issued a public proclamation. Anyone who touches this man or his wife will be put to death. So he protects them. But the point is that he had to teach Isaac what was right in regard to his wife. And I'm sad to say that in this case, the church in so many areas continues to be a tail light and not a headlight when it comes to true morality. You ought not have to leave the church in order to get past hypocrisy and hear the truth about sex, the truth about money, or the truth about equality. You ought not have to leave the church. How the bar going to be a freer place than the church is? Because knowing the bar, everybody's welcome. I had a friend of mine who preached a sermon, the church ought to be more like a bar. You come to a bar, all they want to know, you want to drink, and they talk to you, and you just, there's not much judgment. Everybody at the bar, everybody's equal. Nobody thinks that they're better than anybody else. The church, you got big eyes, little U's. You got some people who think that they are spiritually superior to other people. You got other people who are looking down on other people who thinking, well, you don't belong here because you didn't come the way I did, and and seniority and all this. How the bar can be a freer place than the church. And in many cases, it is the bar. Yes, the saloon. Your thoughts As I told you, I'm not just interested in giving information. I'm trying to give us things to think on and pray about and draw the parallels. But your thoughts about any of this, even in terms of what we talked about earlier, how favoritism in a family can destroy sibling relations, the damage that it does to people in a family when parents, grandparents show favoritism. Have you experienced it? Do you know anyone who has? How did it go? And what about this issue of the church being a tail light instead of a headlight? And the fact that the world has to teach the church how to treat people. The world has to teach the church how to treat people. The world has to tell the church, be honest with your money. Sister Eden, I believe parents should love children equally. Maybe Rebecca saw the favoritism and tried to compensate. Either way, it plants seeds for discord in the siblings and low esteem, jealousy, unwantedness, etc. I'm not sure what you mean by saw the favoritism. You mean the favoritism of her husband and tried to compensate for it? Maybe a better solution would have been for her to have a conversation with her husband about that. But even if Isaac was determined to favor Esau, Rebecca's compensation should not have been then, well, let me just favor Jacob. That was not the compensation. The compensation should have been, no, I'm speaking to your father about this. I've told him my concern about the fact that he's treating you, Esau, better than he is Jacob. I want you to know that I'm not a part of that. And I'm going to make sure that in my eyes and in my treatment, both of you know that you are loved equally. Now, I heard somebody say that it's impossible to love equally, but you can love adequately. You can love each person adequately. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's possible to really love equally? I mean, because even as parents, for those of you who have more than one children, you have your favorites. For that matter, siblings have their own sibling, have their favorite siblings among the family. People are going to have their favorites. But how do you get beyond that to make sure that everybody feels loved and feels valued? And of course, we should all treat our children the same. Easier said than done. The question is, how do we make it happen? And when it does happen, what do we do to correct it? Is the question. Certainly, we know we should do it, but it's not done. What happens when it doesn't? And if it is being done, how do we correct it? If we don't, what are the ramifications? What are the implications? What's the long-term damage look like? If you want to explore that issue. But I want somebody to comment, if you will, also about this business of the world leading the church morally instead of the church leading the world morally. What do you think about that too? See, I have to ask these questions to engage you in conversation, because if not, you'll just listen to me lecture, and that's not the point of Bible study. Brenda King says, shrewd diminished values in the church if Gentiles have to tell Christians how to behave with morals. I'm not sure. You have to explain that statement to me a little bit more, Sister Bree. But I'll tell you this, there's a problem. There's a problem when the world has to lead the church instead of the church being the moral compass for the world, which is what it should be. That God has placed the church as a moral compass. But like I say, in too many cases, the world has had to come in and correct the church. Mother Sherman says, today they say that we should have a will so the family won't have to fight over what we leave. I think that's true. A will is good. But while people are living, again, the question is, have you ever experienced or ever known about favoritism among family members being so strong that it has damaged people? Perhaps you, perhaps someone that you know. And how do we deal with it? How do we address it? How do we correct it? Or do we keep that kind of cycle going? Sibling rivalries, bad blood, as we say, bad blood between siblings, based upon how they were raised, based upon who got favored and who got neglected. What's the faithful thing to do? What's the honest thing to do? And do we ever call it out? Do we ever ask the questions? How is it that certain people are raised feeling neglected, feeling unloved, feeling unvalued? How does that happen? In the same family. So King says, as hard as we try in family situations, the reality is favoritism is human nature and unavoidable, although we must earnestly try to treat children and siblings equally. Well, I'm glad we're talking about this, because the question is favoritism really unavoidable? Is it? Sister King says it is. Do you all agree with that statement? That in every family, you're going to have favoritism to the extent that some feel valued and some feel neglected? Is that unavoidable? Really? Is it? People like who they like. Does that necessarily have to translate into others feeling neglected? Does it? That's an interesting statement. I just want to know how many agree with it. That favoritism is unavoidable. I guess maybe like just something you gotta live with, you think? Is favoritism in family unavoidable? It's just a part of human nature. Is it possible? Let me hear from those of you who have more than one child. Is it possible for you to avoid favoritism in your family? Is that possible? And if so, how do you keep your own personal feelings for one child and put that aside and make everybody feel valued and loved? Because I think that's really the key to parenting. If you have more than one child, that each of your children feels loved and valued. And even though you might have your personal preferences, it's never displayed to the extent that some people feel hurt and left out. So, sister, let me just read some of your comments because I don't see them appearing here. Sister Donna Bell says, yes, I have heard of favoritism. All right, that's one thing. Let me see, very deep. Yeah, that's why I'm raising it, Sister Jessica, because these are very deep things that I think we seldom talk about. But these are the things that cause so much damage in families, even Christian church families, where you have this favoritism for whatever reason. Split families. You from one side, you from the other side. Your mama's not my mama. Your daddy is not my daddy, etc., etc. Lily Robinson says, to love equally is to love each based on their personality. We are all different. I may like sports and my siblings may like art. Spend time with each. Yes, that's one way to get at it. You have to understand that each person is an individual. They're going to have their individual likes, and they may not like what you like. But that doesn't mean that you treat them differently, because that's part of honoring them for who they are. And maybe in our families, we ought to spend more time trying to get to know who our children are, who our siblings are, and learning to respect them for who they are rather than trying to make them who we want them to be. Because that's the other part of where parents fail, trying to make their children who they want them to be rather than allowing them to be who they are and accepting them for who they are. So, Esau liked to hunt. Jacob liked to stay around the house and do stuff there. One is not bad, one is not good. It's just different. One is not deficient. They're just different. Difference is not necessarily deficient. But my goodness, we have to do a better job, because I'm telling you that a lot of these psychological issues that we deal with as adults are based upon certain neglect in our families being raised. That's why I'm taking the time to address it. Sister Eaton says, I disagree with that statement. The teaching is a prime example of why favoritism is not. Let me put this up. Let me see if I can put it up. Yeah, the teaching is a prime example of why favoritism is not. You mean not unavoidable? I think that's your point making. Yes, interesting. All right. Well, interesting comments there. By the way, and this is a personal thing that each of us can answer. If you were raised in a family where you have siblings, was there any inkling that all of you were not valued and treated equally? Or are you yourself the victim of some kind of neglect based upon the fact that you were not favored in your family? Now, I know some people that were not favored based on their skin color alone, because either they were too light or they were too dark. I mean, there are all kind of, reasons why people, put certain children ahead of other children. But it never turns out well. I think favoritism can be avoided if we pay attention. And if we're willing to do what's necessary to correct it. Sister Lady Robinson, yeah, I feel like the black sheep in the family. Yeah, anybody else feel like that sometimes? You ever feel like you're the black sheep in your own family, or the white sheep, whatever you want to call it? The oddball. How about the one that doesn't just fit in, the one that doesn't belong? And how has that impacted your growth and your development? And if you're a parent, does that make you more aware of it? And does that make you more conscientious in terms of providing an equal level of acceptance and sharing equal value for each of your children? Or do we just perpetuate that on in so many other ways? Because if you don't pay attention to it and you never address it, it will continue. And either consciously or subconsciously, we'll duplicate those favoritisms and those divisions in our own families. Treating the same is honorable and much easier than not actually having a preference. Psychologically speaking, I was the favorite in my family, just as the Babo. I'm not sure what that is, Babo. And maybe, for those, who have been the favorites, maybe they don't understand how seriously damaging it is to whatever reason feel like you are the neglected one. Okay, things to think about, things to pray about, as we also think about the ways that the church has failed in terms of providing moral leadership for the world. Ways that the church has failed in providing moral leadership for the world. Because anytime the world has to step in, the legal system has to step in and teach and tell the church how to act, that means the church has failed. And we have, as I say, several examples of that. Several examples, too many examples of that. Too many. And the church has got to do a better job of doing the introspective work. Introspection, not just sinners, y'all need to come in. No, let's get inside correct too. Let's not just be about outside evangelism. Let's also be about inner correction and inner evangelism as well, because there are a lot of people who are lost in the house. Like the coin that was lost in the house. There are a lot of church folk who are lost in church. And the church has to do a better job of helping people cope with the issues that they bring into the house of God and cover up in the name of religion. Yes, the church has to do a better job of helping people confront their own demons in the church. Okay, things to think about and pray about. We'll pick up on this next time as we continue our journey through Genesis and talk about the journey of now Jacob. So the birthright, the promise has passed. I see your comment, Deacon Ingram. Not in my household family, but in school, my 6th grade teacher used to favor me. All my classmates hated me because of it. That's the other thing. For people who are favored, that's not always an easy road either, because if your classmates or your siblings perceive that you are favored, then they end up turning against you as well. And then you got all kind of unnecessary heat coming from them. Favoritism is a real challenge. So I think it is natural that people are just going to like who they like. But I think that we can be very careful and very conscientious as to how we allow our likes to dominate our behavior. Because I can tell you that in my own family, a family of 4, there are 4 of us, 2 brothers. I have 2 brothers and 1 sister. One brother is now passed. But I grew up in a family of 4, 2 brothers and 1 sister, 1 older brother, 1 younger brother, and my sister's the oldest. I can tell you that my mom, I think, as growing up in that household, I think she did an excellent job of making each of us feel valued and special. Now, I think in each of our own ways, we each think that we were the favorite. In each of our own ways, we each think we were her favorite. But isn't it amazing that, she's gone on to glory now, but we each think, oh, she made me feel so special. And I love her for loving me and not, putting another sibling, or for that matter, anybody else above me, or making me think that I was less than anybody else, or making me think that I was not, as accepted as anybody else. There's got to be something to that. Got to be something to that. But thank you for at least thinking on these things with me. And I will look forward to our continuing discussion as we see how this plays out in the life of Jacob, because the narrative's focus now turns to Jacob. We've come through Abraham, we've come through Isaac. Now it is Jacob. And we're going to see how his deception serves him in the long run. As I say, he did not have to connive his brother out of his birthright. God had already given it to him. And maybe this week we should be thinking about ways that we are tempted to step outside of God's will to get what we want, and asking ourselves, what does it say about the fact that the Lord is my shepherd? And if anybody's tempted to do anything illegal and to engage in any kind of theft, robbery, it happens all the time. We should ask ourselves, what does that say about our faith in God? What does it say about the fact that we claim the Lord to be our shepherd? I want to put a pin right here. Thank you so much for being with me on tonight. I hope that these lessons are triggering your conscience. I hope they're giving you plenty of things to think about and pray about and consider in your life, in your family, in your dealings, your business dealings. I want to thank you for all that you give to continue to support Victory for the World Church. Thank you for your prayers. Thank you for your financial gifts. Thank you for supporting your church. And thank you for supporting your pastor. Grateful for all that God continues to do. And I'm going to ask you to continue to support and to be prayerful. To God be the glory for the marvelous things that God continues to do in our lives. And I thank God for your presence with me on tonight. And I look forward to next Wednesday when we will continue our journey through the book of Genesis. Please continue to pray for the family of Mother Janie Lewis. Please continue to pray for all of our mothers. Mother Susie Groves is about to celebrate her 95th birthday in Houston, Texas. And we certainly want to pray her strength in body, mind, and spirit. And she tells me that she plans to be with us sometime soon, but she's turning 95 years young. And we are thanking God for Mother Susie Groves as well, lifting up Mother Janie Lewis, lifting up all of our mothers whom we love dearly, and we thank God for them, and fathers as well, and all of you on tonight. We praise God for you. Please continue to give financially. Please continue to pray fervently. And we hope to see you as soon as possible, as the Lord will allow. Gracious God, we're thankful for this day. We're thankful for the truth of your living word. Won't you speak to our hearts and speak to our minds, bless us and use us to your glory. Help us not just to be hearers of the word, but doers of the word. Help us to apply these lessons to our daily lives so that we can indeed become more like the Christ whom we love and adore. God, make us your lights and help us to let our light shine. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless your family. Till next time.